Hey, happy Thursday. Hope you are enjoying this sunshine here this week. We have a lot to cover this week. We have the Johnson & Johnson vaccine kind of being held back. We are finally seeing inflation is here. And then, of course, this week, the Coinbase IPO that went public just Wednesday. My name is Brandon Steele, financial advisor with Mainsail Financial Group here in Bellevue. And our goal is just to bring you some kind of quick snapshot of the market updates of the week every Thursday at 3 p.m. Hopefully this is helpful. If so, please do follow us, subscribe, like our pages, and we will make sure to keep bringing this to you every week. If you're here in Washington, it's been an amazing start to the week so far. It feels like spring, almost summer. We've been in the mid 70s, and actually, I think over the weekend, I think it's supposed to get up to the 80s even, or close to anyway. So I am very excited to hopefully get back into the golf season here a little bit myself. Let's go ahead and jump right into it. So this week, again, we had a lot to cover. The very first thing that I want to touch on is that inflation is here. We've been talking about this for so long now. I feel like for the past, I don't know, 9 months or so, I've said inflation, inflation, inflation every week, and the data hasn't really shown it unless you look maybe a little bit more with a microscope. But here we are. On Tuesday, the core consumer price index, numbers came out, and they were up 0.6%. So finally, we heard it everywhere that inflation is here. The numbers are finally starting to show it. I think this is the highest increase we've seen in almost 10 years. So, it's pretty significant. I think that what we saw was that over this time, I've talked about inflation, us feeling inflation, but not necessarily seeing it in the data. What's happened is that it's gone through things like food prices. Lumber is a very good example. All these things that have really ticked up in prices, but a lot of the other stuff, such as traveling, lodging, entertainment, fuel prices, those types of things hadn't really increased. And so now those are starting to pick up a little bit, and it's really impacting that number. So keep an eye on that. I think inflation is starting, and I think that, again, for those who have heard us before, once that starts, it's going to be hard to kind of slow down or stop. So it'll be something really important to watch. I don't expect it to get out of hand, but I do expect that number will keep climbing over time. Also this week, that Johnson & Johnson vaccine, the kind of one and done version, has been kind of pulled off the shelves. So that'll be a very interesting thing to watch. I know there's been a pretty big number of people who have had that vaccine. A very small amount have had issues, but obviously it's enough where, there's a bit of a concern there. And so they're holding it back for now, may come back into place soon, but hopefully that doesn't slow kind of our path to, getting the people who do want the vaccines, getting those out and finished up. On top of that, more in general market news, we also had Coinbase IPO on Wednesday. Coinbase is basically a trading platform for the Bitcoins and things like that. So that has been just crazy to watch. I mean, on Wednesday, it opened up huge. It was up to about 420, I think, at the highest, down today to about 320. So quite the story there. Obviously, cryptocurrency has been a big topic of discussion. And now we've got kind of an IPO around that now. I'd have to look into this a little bit more, but this may mean more to the concerns that I've shared in the past about IPO markets and what's going on there. But obviously a big down day for a lot of the people that might have gone in after the IPO, especially. This week, we also had Fed Chair Powell speak on Wednesday, so just yesterday. And there was not a whole lot that came out of it. He will also be coming up, was that the 27th, I believe, the last week in April, so pay attention there. But one thing I did catch out of it was he said they still need to see substantial further progress. That's always what he says, substantial further progress. But he did say that at that point, they would basically pull back on the bond buying before raising interest rates. So this is the first time we've really heard any sort of glimpse as to what that process would look like when they scale back. I might be reading way too far into this, but maybe it's a little bit of a hint of what's to come. I'm really excited to see what happens coming up at the end of April when he talks on the 27th, because if he starts to hint at that a little bit more, then this might be part of a plan to start rolling that out slowly so that when they do start to unwind, it's not a huge shock to the market. So really pay attention to that at the end of the month. If there are some kind of things in between the lines there, it might be a sign. I might be reading way too far into it at this point. I wouldn't act on anything there right now, but definitely something to watch. And then today, Thursday, we had initial jobless claims come out. That came out at about 576,000. A huge, huge drop. This was so important. You know, we've had terrible jobs numbers over the weekly jobs numbers, excuse me, forever. This really hasn't been, we haven't seen anything this low, I think, since really this all started about a year ago. So it's very good to see that. Hopefully that's a sign of some of these, you know, some of the layoffs starting to slow down or something. And hopefully this is a trend that continues. On top of that, today we had retail sales come out at increased by 9.8%. I think that's the biggest jump we've seen in about a year as well. You know, it's kind of like, you've probably heard this said before, but maybe this is that roaring 20s effect starting to happen. You know, it's kind of like, you know, a kid first day at college after being kind of sheltered their whole lives, right? We've been sat in our houses for a year and no choices to do anything. And it's possible that now that we're starting to get a little breath of fresh air and see what the world is like, we're going crazy. So that'll be interesting to see how, you know, how the world kind of reacts to this when we do get back to normal, hopefully sooner than later. But also the stimulus checks, you know, a lot of people received those recently. So that may have a big impact on some of that number as well. So huge jump, really important. Sales are going to be really important in the months and years to come. But hopefully it's a longer term sort of evolution as opposed to just a one-time data point. And then before we get to the question of the week, coming up next week, we've got a lot. We've got housing starts, we've got consumer sentiment, and then on Thursday we have GDP numbers. So really pay attention to next week. And again, the following, we've got the Fed coming into play. So that's what we're really watching. That's going to be a big, you know, big kind of conversation to follow and pay very close attention to. So the question of the week this week is a good one. This is really important. We now see inflation numbers come out. So of course, that's our question of the week. And by the way, if you have a question that you would like us to cover, please do email us. This is, you know, we love answering them directly from you as opposed to kind of what we're hearing in general. So happy to answer any questions. You just email us info@mainsailfg.com. And for this week, the question is, well, what's the impact of inflation? And basically the gist of it is that inflation is rising prices, right? If we have $1 and all of a sudden, you know, that dollar buys us, well, let's go a different way. Dollar's a little low. Let's say $3 buys us a gallon of gas, and all of a sudden, a year later, that $3 only buys us a half a gallon. That is inflation. Cost of goods are increasing. So as cost of goods increase, as you might imagine, that's the cost of living, right? Our rents may get higher, fuel may get higher, food may get higher, all these different things. So when that happens, one of the challenges is that the things that we don't need, we don't buy as much, right? If all of a sudden it costs us twice as much, this is an exaggeration, twice as much just to live, well, now we've got half as much to spend. And so it's really a big impact on the consumer and on us as individuals, how inflation really plays out. Now, as far as the investing side of things, generally what that means is that when we see these inflationary environments, especially early on, it's very important to be invested, because if we're sitting in cash, we're not really going anywhere and prices are getting more expensive. So a lot of times it may mean stocks, it may mean you know, commodities, whatever the case may be. But generally, you may want to look to things that will be needed. So a good example is like consumer staples, for instance, right? Think food and beverages, those types of things. If prices go up, we're not eating anymore, right? We still need to put food on the table. So those things are still being purchased. Those things are still in play. Whereas maybe the more fun stuff is not necessarily, you know, going to be spent on as much, the travel, the leisure, that kind of stuff. So that's kind of how inflation may work. Now, longer term, inflation can have some very big impacts, bad impacts. So hopefully this isn't a long-term thing that we see here, but generally speaking, that's some things to watch as far as inflation goes. If you want to think about it this way, you know, if you had access to some sort of water source and basically people went crazy, everybody started drinking extra water and everything dried up, you're the only one with access to water anymore. As you might imagine, you might be able to charge a lot more for that resource than you would have prior. Same thing goes with money, right? If we have a lot more money in the economy, that dollar is not going to buy nearly as much, and that is the impact of inflation. So this will be really important to watch. You know, anytime you have some sort of finite resource can generally help out along those lines, and that's why investing is really important in those types of scenarios. So I think we'll break there. Next week, we've got a lot to cover, and hopefully that question was helpful given what we've seen this week. Again, if you do have a question for us for the question of the week, please email us info@mainsailfg.com, and we'll see you next Thursday at 3.